The massive space station called Axis Point floated in the darkness between stars. It was the size of a small moon, built by 17 different alien species working together. Inside its metal halls, representatives from across the galaxy gathered for an emergency meeting. The air recyclers hummed quietly, mixing oxygen, methane, and other gases that different species needed to breathe. Holographic displays flickered with data streams in a dozen alien languages. Jiho walked slowly through the curved corridors, his simple black suit looking plain compared to the elaborate robes and armor worn by alien diplomats around him. He carried only a worn leather bag over his shoulder. Other diplomats rushed past him with entire teams of advisors, military officers, and AI assistants. Jiho walked alone. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, and his face showed the calm expression of someone who had seen many conflicts in his 53 years of life. The council chamber was enormous. 17 platforms floated at different heights to accommodate species that flew, swam in liquid tanks, or simply stood on solid ground. The center of the room held a projection sphere, where star maps and treaty documents appeared during debates. Today, the sphere showed the Outer Rim territories in red, marking the disputed zones where war might begin. The Velcran delegation arrived last, as they always did. They wanted everyone to watch them enter. The Velcran stood nearly 3 meters tall on 6 powerful legs. Their bodies were covered in dark chitinous armor that nature had given them. 4 arms ending in sharp claws hung at their sides. Their heads were triangular with compound eyes that could see in multiple directions at once. When they moved, their exoskeletons clicked and scraped together, creating sounds that made many species uncomfortable. Thexval, the Velcran war speaker, climbed onto his species platform. His armor was decorated with carved symbols representing battles he had won. His mandibles clicked together in patterns that the translation devices struggled to interpret. When he spoke, his voice came through the translators as deep and harsh. "The Velcran Empire has waited long enough," Thexval announced. 3 Tarian colony worlds now belong to us by right of ancient claim. The Galactic Council has 72 hours to recognize our sovereignty over the entire Outer Rim. If you refuse, we will consider all council members as thieves of Velcran territory. We will respond with total war. The chamber erupted in noise. The Tarian ambassador, a being made of living light contained in a crystalline body, pulsed with colors that indicated extreme distress. The Tarians were a peaceful trading civilization. They had lost millions of citizens when the Velcrans attacked their colonies without warning. 3 entire worlds had been destroyed, their cities reduced to ash, their populations scattered or dead. A Kordath diplomat, one of the amphibious hive mind species, spoke through their translation device. "This is madness. The Outer Rim territories were settled legally under council law. The Velcrans have no legitimate claim." Thexval's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Legitimate? We held those worlds 3,000 years ago, before your species even discovered fire. They are ours. They have always been ours. You are the thieves." Other species began shouting. The Nexari, beings made of living crystal who communicated through light patterns, flashed angry colors. The Morphids, shape-shifting beings who currently wore humanoid forms, argued for immediate military action. The Quen, a species of floating gas bag creatures, released pheromones that indicated fear and preparation for conflict. Jiho sat quietly on the human platform, which was positioned at a middle height among the others. Humans were still considered junior members of the Galactic Council. Earth had joined only 30 years ago, and many species still saw humanity as primitive newcomers who barely understood galactic politics. The human platform was smaller than most others, a subtle reminder of humanity's lower status. He opened his leather bag and removed a paper notebook and a simple pen. This caught the attention of several nearby diplomats. Paper was an ancient technology that most species had abandoned thousands of years ago. The Morphid ambassador leaned toward his advisor and whispered something. The advisor's skin rippled with colors that suggested confusion or perhaps contempt. For 3 days, the debate continued. Species formed defensive alliances. Military commanders presented strategic assessments. The Velcrans sat silently during most discussions, their presence a constant threat. Thexval occasionally interjected with reminders of the approaching deadline, his mandibles clicking in patterns that seemed almost pleased by the growing chaos. Jiho listened to everything. He watched how each species reacted to threats. He noticed which diplomats spoke from genuine concern and which spoke from political calculation. He observed the Velcrons carefully, noting every movement, every sound, every pattern in their behavior. He filled pages of his notebook with observations written in neat Korean characters. On the evening of the third day, another human diplomat approached Jiho in the observation lounge. Her name was Minji, and she served as Earth's strategic advisor at Axis Point. She was 20 years younger than Jiho, brilliant and impatient. She had graduated top of her class from the Diplomatic Academy and had orchestrated several successful trade negotiations for Earth. "You haven't said a single word in 3 days," Minji said, frustration clear in her voice. "The other species are starting to think humanity doesn't care about this crisis. Some are questioning why Earth even sent a representative." Jiho looked up from his notebook. "I'm listening. Listening won't stop a war. The Velcrans are going to attack. 16 species will be drawn into the conflict. Billions will die. Earth Command is demanding to know your strategy." "I don't have a strategy yet," Jiho said calmly. "I'm still learning." Minji sat down heavily in the chair across from him. Through the observation window behind her, stars stretched out in all directions. Somewhere out there, military fleets were already moving into position, preparing for the war that seemed inevitable. "Jiho, I know you were successful with village disputes back on Earth. I know you have an excellent record with corporate mediation, but this isn't about settling an argument over water rights or factory ownership. These are warrior aliens who literally need conflict to survive. Their entire civilization is built around war. You can't mediate with them using silence and patience." Jiho closed his notebook and looked directly at Minji. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "or perhaps that's exactly what they've never experienced before. Every species in this council has responded to Velcran aggression with fear, anger, or military threats. Everyone speaks their language of violence. Maybe someone needs to speak a different language." "What language?" "Silence." Minji stared at him for a long moment. "That's insane." "Maybe," Jiho agreed. He stood up and gathered his notebook and bag. "The deadline is in 48 hours. I should visit the Velcran delegation." "Visit them?" "They'll kill you." "Perhaps. But I need to understand them better." Jiho walked toward the exit, leaving Minji sitting alone in the observation lounge, watching his reflection disappear in the window against the backdrop of stars and the approaching darkness of war. The Velcran delegation occupied the lower sections of Axis Point, in chambers designed for heavy gravity species. The corridors leading to their area were darker and warmer than the rest of the station. Warning signs in multiple languages advised other species to announce themselves before entering. The Velcrans did not welcome unexpected visitors. Jiho walked through these corridors alone. He had not requested permission. He had not brought guards or weapons or even a communication device. He simply walked to the large metal door that marked the entrance to Velcran territory within the station and waited. Security sensors detected his presence immediately. Inside the chamber, alarms sounded. 2 Velcran warriors appeared at the door, their massive forms blocking the entrance completely. Their claws extended and the chemical scent of their aggressive pheromones filled the air. The translation devices on their armor crackled with harsh sounds. "Human, you enter warrior territory without permission. This is death offense." Jiho bowed slightly, a gesture of respect from his Korean culture. "I wish to observe. Nothing more." The warriors clicked their mandibles together in confusion. One reached out with a claw, ready to strike this foolish creature. But before it could move, a voice called out from inside the chamber. "Let him enter." It was Thexaval. The war speaker himself had intervened. The warriors stepped aside reluctantly, and Jiho walked past them into the Velcran chamber. The room was arranged like a military command center. Holographic displays showed fleet positions and tactical data. Younger Velcran warriors practiced combat movements in one corner, their exoskeletons clashing as they sparred. The air was thick and hot, matching the conditions of the Velcran homeworld. Thexval stood at the center of the room, studying a star map. He turned his massive head to look at Jiho with compound eyes that could see in spectrums humans couldn't perceive. "You are the human diplomat who has said nothing for 3 days. Why are you here?" "To observe," Jiho said simply. He walked to an empty corner of the room, sat down on the floor cross-legged and became still. Thexaval's mandibles clicked in a pattern that might have been surprise or irritation. You have 45 hours until our deadline. You waste time sitting in our chamber? Jiho said nothing. He simply sat, his eyes open but his expression calm, watching the Velkrans go about their activities. For the first hour, the warriors kept glancing at him, uncertain how to respond to this strange behavior. Some made aggressive gestures, testing whether he would react with fear. Jiho remained still. Others discussed whether they should remove him by force, but Thexaval had allowed him to enter, and to question the war speaker's decision would be a challenge to his authority. Jiho watched everything. He saw how the Velkrans moved, how they communicated through clicks and pheromones and body positions. He noticed that the younger warriors were more aggressive, constantly testing each other, competing for status. The older warriors, including Thexaval, moved with more control and purpose. They had less to prove. He observed their war rituals. Every few hours, the warriors would gather in a circle and perform synchronized movements, clicking their mandibles in complex rhythms. It was beautiful in its own way, a dance of violence and precision passed down through generations. But Jiho noticed something others might have missed. When the younger warriors performed the ritual, they moved with intense energy and perfect synchronization. When Thexaval joined them, his movements were slightly slower, his rhythm occasionally off by a fraction of a second. After 6 hours, one of the younger warriors approached Jiho directly. Its name was Krelvas, and it was considered one of the rising leaders among the new generation of Velkran fighters. You sit here like a stone. Are you afraid? Do you hope we will forget you are here? Jiho looked up at the towering warrior. I am not afraid. Then why do you not speak? Why do you not argue for peace like the other weak species? Why do you not threaten us with your human military? Would any of those things change your mind? Krelvas clicked its mandibles in what seemed like satisfaction. No, we desire war. We need war. Without war, we have no purpose. Our young warriors have fought only small battles and border skirmishes. They need a real conflict to prove themselves, to become true adults in our society. Your council has given us the perfect enemy, and you will attack whether we recognize your claims or not, Jiho said quietly. Of course, the territorial claim is just tradition. We must state our cause before war begins. But yes, we will attack. We desire it. Jiho nodded slowly and returned to his silence. Krelvas stood there for a moment longer, then clicked its mandibles in frustration and walked away. After 12 hours in the Velkran chamber, Jiho stood up, bowed slightly to Thexaval, and left without saying another word. The war speaker watched him go, his complex eyes reflecting confusion. Over the next day and a half, Jiho visited other delegations using the same method. He sat silently in the Tarian chamber, watching their grief rituals for the lost colony worlds. The Tarians performed elaborate light displays, their crystalline bodies pulsing with colors that represented mourning and loss. Jiho observed for hours, noting every pattern, every shade of light. He spent time with the Kordath delegation, the amphibious hive mind species that communicated through synchronized swimming movements in their liquid-filled chambers. He watched through the transparent walls as hundreds of small Kordath individuals moved as one, creating patterns that conveyed complex thoughts and emotions. He even visited the Nexari, the crystalline beings who processed information at speeds that made normal conversation nearly impossible. They communicated through light pulses so rapid that special computer systems were needed to translate their speech into something other species could understand. Jiho sat in their chamber, watching the light patterns, not trying to understand every detail, but rather sensing the overall emotion and intent behind their communication. Minji found him in the human quarters late that night. The deadline was now just 14 hours away. Military fleets from multiple species were positioned throughout the sector. Evacuation orders had been issued for frontier colonies. The galaxy was preparing for war. Earth Command is demanding answers, Minji said, her voice tight with stress. They want to know your plan. The president himself called. He asked if you've had a mental breakdown. Jiho was making tea using a small portable kettle he had brought from Earth. The simple ceramic cup and the careful ritual of preparing the tea seemed absurdly out of place given the circumstances. Don't have a breakdown, Jiho said calmly. I have an understanding. Understanding of what? Of why the Velkrans truly desire war. Of what drives them. Of the trap they've built for themselves. He poured the tea, the steam rising in the recycled air of the space station. And I understand how to end this without a single word being spoken. That's impossible, is it? Every species has been speaking to the Velcrans in their own language. The Tarians speak of loss and justice. The Morphids speak of military strategy and deterrence. Even humans have been preparing speeches about diplomatic solutions and compromise. But none of those languages reach the Velcrans because they're not listening. They've already decided what they want. So what will you do? Jiho sipped his tea. I will speak in a language they've never heard before. A language that has no words I don't understand. You will. In 14 hours everyone will understand. Minji left feeling more worried than when she had arrived. She sent a message to Earth Command explaining that Jiho had a plan, but couldn't articulate it clearly. The response from Earth was not encouraging. They were preparing to recall him and send a replacement diplomat, but there wasn't enough time before the deadline. Jiho spent the remaining hours before the final council session in meditation. He sat on the floor of his small quarters, eyes closed, breathing slowly and steadily. He reviewed everything he had observed over the past days. Every movement, every sound, every pattern of behavior from every species involved in this crisis. He thought about his years working as a mediator in rural Korea, settling disputes between farming families who had feuded for generations, helping factory owners and workers find common ground, bringing peace to communities torn apart by old grievances. He had learned that the loudest voices rarely revealed the true heart of a conflict. The real understanding came in the quiet moments, in what people didn't say, in the patterns of their behavior when they thought no one was watching. The Velcrans desired war. Everyone could see that. But Jiho had seen something deeper during his silent observation. He had seen the exhaustion in Thexval's movements during the war rituals. He had noticed the mandatory nature of the younger warriors' aggression, as if they were following a script they couldn't escape. He had understood that the Velcran civilization had trapped itself in a cycle where war was no longer a means to achieve goals but had become the goal itself. And he knew that you couldn't argue someone out of a trap. You could only show them the door. 10 hours remained before the Velcran deadline when Jiho requested a meeting with Daeho, Earth's military attaché stationed at Axis Point. Daeho worked in the secure military section of the human delegation area, surrounded by tactical displays and encrypted communication systems. He was a career naval officer, 45 years old, with the sharp eyes and steady hands of someone who had commanded warships in dangerous situations. When Jiho entered his office, Daeho was reviewing defensive fleet positions. Earth's small but modern fleet was positioned to protect the solar system if the war spread. It wasn't much compared to the ancient civilization's armadas, but humanity had learned to build efficient warships in its short time among the stars. Ambassador Jiho, Daeho said, standing up and bowing slightly. Despite the informal nature of Earth's diplomatic corps, military officers still maintain traditional protocols. I wasn't expecting you. Most diplomats are avoiding the military section right now, trying to pretend this war won't actually happen. Jiho sat down in the chair across from the commander's desk. I need your professional opinion on something, Commander. In your training, what do you do when an enemy wants war? Daeho answered without hesitation. You deny them favorable conditions. You make the war too costly, too difficult, unprofitable. You remove their advantages and create situations where they lose more than they gain. And what if the war itself is what they truly desire? What if victory or defeat is secondary to the act of fighting? Daeho frowned, thinking carefully. Then you're dealing with an enemy that can't be reasoned with through normal strategic thinking. An enemy like that is dangerous because they don't follow rational cost-benefit calculations. They'll keep fighting even when they're losing because the fight itself is what matters to them. Exactly, Jiho said quietly. The Velcrans don't want the Outer Rim territories. They want war. Their entire civilization is structured around conflict. Their economy runs on military production. Their social hierarchy is based on combat achievements. Their young warriors cannot become full adults without proving themselves in battle. Without war, their society would collapse within a generation. Daeho leaned back in his chair, processing this. So the territorial claims are just an excuse? A justification for starting the conflict they need?
Yes, they need an enemy.
They need conflict, and everyone has been giving them exactly what they want, by responding with threats, military mobilization, and defensive alliances. We've been playing into their hands, but if we don't respond with military readiness, they'll simply attack and destroy us. Will they? Jiho asked. I spent 12 hours in their chamber, Commander. I watched them carefully. I saw something that everyone else missed because they were too busy preparing for war. Daeho activated a privacy screen around his office, ensuring their conversation couldn't be monitored. What did you see? Jiho pulled out his notebook and opened it to a page filled with observations written in Korean. The younger Velkran warriors are eager, aggressive, desperate for conflict. They've been raised on stories of great wars their ancestors fought, but they've only experienced minor skirmishes themselves. They need a major war to fulfill their cultural expectations. But Thexval, their war speaker, is different. How? He's old. He's actually fought in real wars before, decades ago. And I noticed something in his body language during their war rituals. His movements were slower than the younger warriors. His rhythm was off. When he made aggressive speeches, his pheromone signals occasionally contradicted his words. The translation devices don't pick up these subtleties, but I watched carefully. Daeho listened intently as Jiho continued. Thexval is exhausted, Commander. He's tired of war, but he's trapped by his own culture's expectations. The younger generation is pushing for this conflict, and as war speaker, he must lead them. If he shows weakness or hesitation, they'll remove him from power. In Velkran culture, that means death. He's being forced to start a war he doesn't truly want. Even if that's true, Daeho said slowly, what can you do about it? He's already issued the ultimatum. Backing down would destroy his authority. You can't ask him to sacrifice himself. You're right. I can't ask him to back down. That would be asking him to commit suicide in front of his own people. Jiho closed his notebook. But what if I don't ask him to do anything? What if I simply change the nature of the conflict itself? I don't understand. Jiho stood up and walked to the window that showed the stars beyond Axis Point. Every species has been treating this as a military crisis. They're speaking the language of war, threats, and power. That's the only language the Velkrans understand because it's the only language anyone has used with them. But there's another language, Commander. One that humanity knows well. What language? Silence. Presence without aggression. Strength without violence. Jiho turned back to face Daeho. In Korea, we have a long history of this approach. During the Japanese occupation, many resistance fighters used non-violent methods. During the division of our country, families separated by politics found ways to maintain connections across borders without weapons. We understand that sometimes the most powerful response to aggression is not counter-aggression, but something else entirely. Daeho shook his head. The Velkrans will see that as weakness. They'll attack immediately. Maybe. Or maybe they'll see something they've never encountered before. An enemy who refuses to be an enemy. A conflict that cannot be resolved through violence because one side won't participate in the violence. That's a massive risk. You could trigger the war instead of preventing it. Yes, Jiho agreed. But the war is already coming, Commander. Everyone can feel it. The Velkrans have made their decision. The Council is preparing for conflict. Military fleets are moving into position. The war is inevitable if we continue on this path. So we must change the path. Daeho studied the calm diplomat standing before him. In his years of military service, he had met many types of people. Brave soldiers who charged into danger. Clever strategists who could outthink any opponent. Politicians who could talk their way out of any crisis. But Jiho was different. There was a stillness about him. A certainty that came not from arrogance but from deep understanding. What do you need from me? Daeho asked finally. I need you to trust me. In 10 hours during the final council session, I'm going to do something that will seem insane. The other delegates will protest. Minji will probably try to stop me. Earth Command might order you to remove me forcibly from the chamber. And you want me to prevent that? I want you to give me time. Just 15 minutes. If my approach hasn't worked after 15 minutes, you can drag me out of there yourself. Daeho considered this. His duty was to protect Earth's interests and follow orders from Earth Command. But he had also served long enough to know that sometimes the textbook solutions didn't work. Sometimes you needed someone crazy enough to try something completely different. 15 minutes, he agreed. But if this goes wrong, Jiho, if you trigger a war that kills billions, then I will carry that responsibility, Jiho said simply. But I don't believe it will go wrong. I've spent 3 days learning everything I can about every species involved in this crisis. I've watched, listened, and understood. The path to peace isn't through more talking, more negotiating, more military posturing. It's through showing them something they've never seen before. After Jiho left, Daeho sat alone in his office for a long time. He pulled up the files on Jiho's background. Before joining the diplomatic corps, Jiho had worked for 20 years as a mediator in rural Korean communities. His success rate was remarkable. He had settled feuds that had lasted for generations, brought peace to villages torn apart by conflict, helped corporations and workers find common ground when everyone else had given up. His method was unusual. Most mediators talked constantly, proposing solutions, finding compromises, pushing both sides toward agreement. Jiho did the opposite. He would sit in silence for hours, sometimes days, simply observing the parties in conflict. People found it unsettling. They would demand that he say something, do something, take action. But Jiho would just sit and watch and listen, and then, when everyone was exhausted from their own anger and rhetoric, when the silence had become so heavy that it demanded to be filled with something real instead of empty words, Jiho would act, not with speeches or proposals, but with simple gestures that somehow cut through to the heart of the conflict. One file described a case where 2 farming families had been fighting over water rights for 40 years. 3 generations of hatred and legal battles. Jiho sat with both families for a week, saying almost nothing. Then one morning, he went to the disputed stream and spent an entire day redirecting it so both families could access the water easily. He didn't ask permission. He didn't propose the solution. He simply did it. The families were so shocked by this wordless resolution that their anger dissolved. They helped him finish the project, working together for the first time in 4 decades. Daeho closed the files and looked at the countdown timer showing hours until the deadline. He sent a coded message to Earth Command explaining that Jiho had an unconventional plan and requesting permission to let it proceed. The response came back quickly. Permission denied. Recall the ambassador if he attempts anything that could trigger hostilities. Daeho stared at the council chamber filled slowly as the final session approached. Representatives from 17 species took their positions on floating platforms arranged throughout the enormous space. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation and dread. Everyone knew this would likely be the last peaceful gathering before war consumed half the galaxy. Military commanders stood beside their diplomatic representatives, ready to coordinate fleet movements the moment hostilities began. Medical ships were already positioned near frontier worlds to evacuate civilians. Trade routes had been suspended. The galaxy held its breath. The Tarian ambassador arrived early, its crystalline body pulsing with dim, sorrowful colors. 3 colony worlds lost, millions of its people dead or displaced. Yet the Tarians, peaceful by nature, still hoped somehow for a resolution that didn't involve more death. The Kordath delegation swam in their liquid-filled chamber, hundreds of small individuals moving in patterns that suggested anxiety and preparation. The Nexari flickered with rapid light pulses, their crystalline forms refracting the chamber's illumination into complex patterns. The Morphids wore intimidating warrior forms today, abandoning their usual diplomatic appearances. Everyone was preparing for the worst. The Velcran delegation entered last. Thexaval led his warriors into the chamber with the confident stride of someone who had already won. His mandibles clicked rhythmically, and his pheromones filled his section of the chamber with the scent of anticipated victory. The younger warriors behind him were practically vibrating with eagerness, their claws flexing, their eyes scanning the other species with predatory focus. 12 hours had passed since Jiho's conversation with Daeho. The deadline was now minutes away. Thexval would make his final statement, the council would give its response, and then the war would begin. It was inevitable, inescapable, already decided. Then Jiho stood up. He didn't request recognition from the council moderator. He didn't wait for permission to speak. He simply rose from his seat on the human platform and walked toward the center of the chamber, toward the projection sphere where star maps usually appeared during debates. The chamber fell silent, confused. This was not proper protocol. The Morphid ambassador began to object, but something in Jiho's calm, deliberate movements made him stop. Every eye, compound and simple, crystalline and organic, turned to watch the human diplomat. Jiho reached the center of the chamber. He carried his leather bag. No weapons, no datapads, no holographic display prepared with diplomatic proposals. Just an old man with a worn bag, standing alone in the space where civilizations normally projected their military might and political power. He set the bag down carefully and opened it. The first item he removed was a small wooden bowl, dark and polished from years of use. He placed it on the floor in front of him with great care, as if it were the most precious object in the galaxy. The aliens watched, baffled. What was this? Some human ritual? A religious ceremony? An insult? No one knew. No one had ever seen anything like this in the council chamber before. Jiho removed a piece of paper from his bag. Real paper made from earth trees, not the synthetic materials most species used. He also pulled out a brush and a small container of black ink. He knelt down beside the bowl in a formal position, his back straight, his breathing steady and calm. Then he began to write. His movements were slow and deliberate. Each stroke of the brush was precise, controlled, meditative. He wrote a single character in traditional Korean calligraphy, the ancient script that his ancestors had used for thousands of years. The character was Chen, meaning silence or to sink into stillness. The aliens watched in absolute confusion. The Velcran warriors clicked their mandibles in agitation. Thexval's compound eyes focused on the human with an intensity that would have made most beings uncomfortable. But Jiho seemed unaware of their attention. He was completely focused on the calligraphy, each stroke receiving his full presence and care. When the character was complete, Jiho set down the brush. He removed one more item from his bag, a small electronic device simple and outdated by galactic standards. He activated it, and suddenly the chamber's holographic displays shifted. Instead of tactical maps and military projections, the displays began showing footage from Earth, but not the footage anyone expected. No demonstrations of human military power, no fleets of warships, no advanced weapons. Instead, the displays showed silence. A monastery in the Korean mountains at dawn, mist rising through ancient pine trees, monks sitting in meditation, perfectly still. A forest after snowfall, not a sound, not a movement, just pristine white peace. A memorial wall where families stood quietly, grieving losses too deep for words. A meditation circle where former enemies sat together in silence, learning to exist in the same space without violence. An empty beach at sunset, waves gently touching the shore. No humans visible, just the peaceful rhythm of nature. The footage continued for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of humanity's relationship with silence. Not silence as weakness or surrender, but silence as power. Silence as respect. Silence as the space where transformation happens, where understanding emerges, where peace becomes possible. The alien delegates watched, unable to look away. Something about the images was hypnotic. In a galaxy filled with noise, with constant communication, with the endless chatter of politics and warfare and commerce, this silence felt profound, ancient, important in a way that none of them had expected. When the footage ended, the displays returned to normal. The chamber remained quiet, everyone still processing what they had witnessed. Then Jiho did something that made several species gasp in shock. He turned his back on Thexval. In Velcran culture, turning your back on an enemy is the ultimate insult. It means you consider them so far beneath you that you don't even regard them as a threat worthy of attention. Warriors had died for lesser insults. The younger Velcran warriors behind Thexval immediately tensed, ready to leap across the chamber and tear this disrespectful human apart. But Jiho's gesture wasn't made with contempt. He turned away slowly, respectfully, and then sat down on the floor of the council chamber in the same meditative posture that had been shown in the Earth footage. He crossed his legs, straightened his back, rested his hands on his knees, and closed his eyes. And he waited. The message was clear without a single word being spoken. I will not fight you. I will not beg you. I will not threaten you. I will not even acknowledge your aggression. I will simply exist in this space, peaceful and present, and you must decide what to do about it. The chamber erupted into chaos. The Morphid ambassador shouted questions. What was the human doing? Was this a strategy? An insult? A surrender? The Kordath hive mind swirled in confusion in their tank. The Nixari flashed light patterns so rapidly their translators couldn't keep up. Minji, watching from the human platform, stood up and started to move toward Jiho. This was insane. He was going to get himself killed and possibly trigger the war immediately. But Deho, standing beside her, gently placed a hand on her arm. Wait, he said quietly. Give him time. Time for what? The Velcrans are going to kill him. Look at them, Deho said, nodding toward the Velcran platform. The younger warriors were indeed ready to attack. Their claws extended, their mandibles clicked aggressively, their bodies coiled like springs ready to release. But they weren't moving, because Thexval hadn't given the order, and Thexval wasn't moving at all. The war speaker stood frozen, his compound eyes fixed on the seated human. For the first time in his long life as a warrior and leader, Thexval faced something he didn't understand. An enemy who refused to be an enemy. A conflict that couldn't be resolved through violence because one participant wouldn't engage in violence. Minutes passed. 5 minutes, then 10. Jiho remained perfectly still, his breathing steady, his expression peaceful. The chaos in the chamber gradually quieted as everyone realized something unprecedented was happening. They were witnessing a confrontation unlike any in galactic history. Not a battle of weapons or words, but a battle of presence itself. 15 minutes passed. Deho's promised time limit was reached. Minji looked at him expectantly, but he shook his head slightly. Not yet, let this play out 20 minutes. The other delegates had gone completely quiet now, sensing that something important was unfolding even if they didn't fully understand it. 25 minutes. Thexval's younger warriors were beginning to look at their leader with confusion. Why wasn't he ordering the attack? Why was he letting this human insult them so completely? Some of the warriors clicked their mandibles questioningly, but Thexval didn't respond. He just stared at the human sitting peacefully in the center of the chamber. 30 minutes after Jiho had sat down, Thexval moved. He stepped forward off his platform, his massive form descending to the chamber floor. Every species tensed, expecting violence. The Tarian ambassador pulsed with alarm colors. The Kordath prepared to evacuate their chamber. Even Deho's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Thexval didn't attack. He walked slowly toward Jiho, his 6 legs carrying him with careful, deliberate steps. He stopped 3 meters away from the seated human. And then, in a movement that shocked every Velcran present, Thexval lowered himself to the ground, not in a crouch. The council chamber held its breath. 17 species watched as the war speaker of the Velcran Empire and a human diplomat sat facing each other in complete silence. The massive alien warrior and the small gray-haired man, separated by 3 meters of empty space and an entire galaxy of cultural differences, simply existed in each other's presence without words, without weapons, without the language of violence that had dominated every interaction until this moment. 5 minutes passed this way. Then 10. The younger Velcran warriors behind Thexval shifted uncomfortably, clicking their mandibles in confusion and growing concern. This was not how war speakers behaved. This was not how conflicts were resolved in Velcran culture. Their leader was supposed to crush this insult with overwhelming force, not sit peacefully as if meditating with the enemy. Finally, Thexval spoke. His translation device carried a tone that no one had ever heard from a Velcran before. Not anger, not aggression, something that sounded almost like confusion or perhaps vulnerability. You offer no defense, no counterattack, no territorial compromise, no military threat. You simply exist here, as if our ultimatum means nothing to you. Jiho opened his eyes slowly and looked at the massive warrior sitting across from him. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. Your ultimatum means everything. That's exactly why I won't respond to it with violence or fear or desperate negotiations. Your civilization desires war because war gives you purpose, structure, and meaning. Your economy depends on military production. Your social hierarchy rewards combat achievements. Your young warriors cannot become adults without proving themselves in battle. Without war, your entire society would collapse within a generation. You've built a trap for yourselves and now you can't escape it. The chamber remained absolutely silent. Every species listened intently. This was the first time anyone had articulated what they had all sensed, but never fully understood about the Velcrans. Thexval's mandibles clicked slowly, a rhythm that suggested deep thought rather than aggression. You understand us. I observed you, Jiho said simply. For 12 hours I sat in your chamber and watched. I saw your warriors, eager and desperate for the great conflict they've been promised their entire lives. I saw their need to prove themselves, to become what their culture demands they become. But I also saw you, war speaker. I saw the exhaustion in your movements during the war rituals. I noticed how your rhythm was slightly wrong, how your pheromones sometimes contradicted your words. You've fought real wars before. You know what they cost, and you're tired. Several of the younger Velcran warriors clicked their mandibles aggressively at this. To suggest that their war speaker was weak was a serious insult. But Thexval raised one claw slightly and they fell silent. You see clearly, human, but your observation changes nothing. If I withdraw our claim, if I refuse to lead my warriors into this war, they will see it as weakness. They will challenge my authority. By Velcran law, I would have to fight them all. My own children would be first in line to kill me for this failure. Yes, Jiho agreed. That's the trap I mentioned. War is no longer a means to achieve goals for your people. It's become the goal itself. Your entire civilization is locked in a cycle where you must keep fighting to maintain your society's structure. And you as war speaker are trapped most of all. You must lead your people into wars you don't want or die. Then you understand that this conversation is pointless. War is inevitable. Is it? Jiho stood up slowly, his movements careful and respectful. From his leather bag he removed one final object. It was small, fitting easily in his palm. A seed pod from Earth, preserved in clear resin so its details were perfectly visible. He knelt and placed it on the floor between himself and Thexval. The seed pod lay there ancient and simple, carrying within it the potential for life. This seed comes from a tree that grows in the Korean DMZ, Jiho explained. DMZ means demilitarized zone. It's a strip of land where my people once pointed weapons at each other for 70 years. Humans on both sides ready to kill each other over political differences. Millions of soldiers. Thousands of weapons. 7 decades of hatred and fear. He paused, letting the alien delegates absorb this. The Tarians pulsed with interested colors. The Kordath swirled closer to their chamber walls to listen better. No humans could enter the DMZ because of the danger from mines and weapons. But in that enforced silence, in that space where war was threatened but never happened, something unexpected occurred. Nature returned. Endangered species that had disappeared from the rest of our peninsula began thriving there. Rare birds nested, ancient trees grew. Ecosystems that humans had destroyed everywhere else found sanctuary in the one place where we were too busy threatening each other to harm the natural world. Jiho looked directly at Thexval with calm, steady eyes. The land healed itself in the silence between conflicts. Life found a way to flourish in the space where war could have happened but didn't. A pretty story, Thexval said, but his tone suggested he was thinking deeply. But my warriors need more than stories. They need purpose. They need a way to prove themselves. Your warriors need challenge and achievement, Jiho corrected gently. War is one way to provide that. But is it the only way? Your species has survived for thousands of years. You've built an empire. You've developed technology, art, culture. War is part of your history, yes, but it's not all of your history. You've created things as well as destroyed them. Jiho stood and addressed not just Thexval, but the younger Velcran warriors listening behind him. Your culture tells you that war is the only path to becoming an adult, to proving your worth. But what if there were other paths equally difficult, equally demanding? What if your warriors could prove themselves by creating instead of destroying, by building instead of breaking, by protecting life instead of ending it? One of the younger warriors, Krelvas, clicked forward aggressively. You ask us to abandon our entire culture, to become weak like the peaceful species. We are Velcrans. We are warriors. Without war, we are nothing. Without war, you are everything you could become, Jiho replied calmly. War is easy. Destroying is easy. Any species can learn to kill. But creating, building, nurturing life in difficult conditions, that requires true strength. That requires courage that goes beyond physical combat. He picked up the seed pod and held it out toward the Velcran warriors. This seed survived in conditions where war was always about to happen. It survived decades of potential destruction. It represents life's victory over violence, not through fighting, but through patience and persistence. That's a different kind of strength. A harder kind, perhaps. Thexval stood up slowly, his massive form towering over Jiho once again. For a long moment, everyone in the chamber expected violence. The tension was unbearable. Then the war speaker reached out with one claw and carefully, gently, took the seed pod from Jiho's hand. He studied it with his compound eyes, turning it slowly to see it from every angle. The resin caught the chamber's light, making the seed inside seem to glow. Life preserved. Potential protected. Hope contained in something smaller than his smallest claw. You offer us a different path, Thexval said slowly. But you don't ask me to surrender or withdraw our claim. You don't demand peace. What do you ask, human? I ask nothing, Jiho said simply. I'm not negotiating. I'm not proposing terms. I'm simply showing you a door you didn't know existed. You can walk through it or not. The choice is yours, but you should know that this door exists. And if we choose war, then war will happen. Many will die. Your warriors will get their conflict, and afterward, in the silence that always follows war, you will face the same trap again. The next generation will need their war, and the next, forever. Until someday you face an enemy that's stronger than you, and the Velcran Empire ends not because you became weak, but because you couldn't imagine any other way to be strong. Thexville held the seed pod for a long time. The chamber remained absolutely quiet. Every species waited. Finally, the war speaker spoke, his words careful and deliberate. I will consult with the Warrior Council. We will not attack during the deadline period. Consider it extended indefinitely while we discuss what you have shown us today. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Jiho. You are brave, human. Foolish perhaps, but brave. You sat in our chamber alone. You turned your back on me in front of my warriors. You spoke truths that could have gotten you killed. Either you have no fear or you have more courage than any being I've met. I was afraid, Jiho admitted quietly. But fear is not a reason to avoid doing what needs to be done. You know this truth, War Speaker. You've been afraid many times in your wars, but you fought anyway. I simply chose a different battlefield. Thexval's mandibles clicked in what might have been respect. Then he and his warriors left the chamber, the War Speaker carefully carrying the small seed pod in his claw like it was the most precious trophy he had ever won. The moment the Velcrans departed, the council chamber exploded with noise. Species shouted questions, demanded explanations, praised or criticized Jiho's actions. The Tarian ambassador pulsed with hopeful colors for the first time since their colonies had been destroyed. The Morphids debated whether the Velcrans would actually